Hi, and welcome back to the WI Cookery School, where I'm showing you how to make a basic white dough into many different things. My name's Haigh, and I want to demystify bread making. Bread making is one of the oldest crafts in the world, and it's a great synergy between our brains and our hands. So what it does is enable us to create things, to create something that people can enjoy eating, but also for us to enjoy the process. So when you're baking, one of the key things for me is that you are prepared. So get yourself ready, put on your apron, and get your ingredients ready and your equipment. So we're going to begin with the flour. And I have here just some plain white strong bread flour. Now the understanding between the flour is quite important. Flour is made up with two proteins in it, and they're called gliadin and glutenin. And gliadin and glutenin, when they're mixed with water, make gluten, and gluten gives the stretch to our dough. So if you've made bread at home before and it's come out very dense or heavy and you're disappointed, hopefully I can help you with that, because a lot of the time it will be the ingredients that you're using. So you need to choose a strong white bread flour. Obviously you can use other flours. Spelt flour, you may have heard about, is a very old ancient wheat. Genetically it is different to modern wheat, and some people do like using spelt, so please do use spelt if you wish in these recipes. It's the same ingredients, same quantity. So our bread flour on the packet, I'll show you here, there is always a list of nutritional information, and on here if you look down to protein, it tells you the amount of protein. So this particular one says 13.3 grams per 100 grams. So that's a really good strong flour. You can go probably up to 15, you can go down to 9. 9 isn't strong enough to make bread, so you need to be 12 and above. So please do check when you're buying your flour that it's got a really good strong content of protein in it. So we've got our strong bread flour. I'm going to now show you the other ingredients. So what I've got here is yeast. So yeast is a key component of making bread. However, you can make bread with soda, so you've probably heard of soda bread. That's made with bicarbonate of soda, but today we're using yeast. Three main types. We've got fresh yeast, which looks a bit like putty. It should be pale in colour. If it's dark, it's old and it won't work. You've got dried yeast, and then you've got an easy action dried yeast. So three types. So I'll just explain those to you, and then you're quite clear. You can choose whichever one you want to use. Fresh yeast, you will use double the amount. So for 500 grams of flour, you probably use 15 grams of fresh yeast, but you would use 7 grams of dried yeast. So it's half the amount of dried yeast to fresh yeast. When you're using fresh yeast, you can buy it online, you can buy it in a supermarket, you can order it. It comes in quite a big block. It comes in a kilo block. So divide the block up into small 15-gram sections, wrap it in cling film, pop it in your freezer, and then you've got it ready to use. So we've got our 15 grams of yeast. Once you use fresh yeast, what you do is you mix it with water at a tepid temperature and a little bit of either flour or sugar to activate it. It will then froth, and I have one here to show you which is frothing beautifully. So I can see that my yeast is active, and then that's ready to mix into my dough. So that's using fresh yeast. If I use dried yeast, I do exactly the same thing. So I mix it with some warm water and a little bit of flour or sugar, and make sure it's frothed. So it needs to be really frothy before you actually mix it. Easy action yeast, which is a much finer powder and slightly lighter in colour than this one, actually you put it straight into the mixture. This one you don't need to froth. I would suggest, if it's the first time you're making bread, that you use easy action. It comes in sachets, so it doesn't deteriorate, and you just open the sachet and use it. So for a beginner, I think that's probably the easiest, but by all means use whichever one you would like. In addition to yeast, we need salt. Now I know there's lots of publicity about not using lots of salt, but actually we need salt in bread. It gives it flavour, but it also enhances the structure of the gluten. So this is a classic table salt, the fine refined table salt, or you could use a sea salt or a rock salt. If you're using a sea salt or a rock salt, you need half the amount. And then a small amount of fat. You don't have to put fat in bread. This is butter. I was brought up in a bakery bakery and we used to use lard, so if you want to use lard you can, or you can use olive oil or any oil, or you can use no fat, but fat helps with the keeping qualities of bread, so it is nice to add a little bit. So those are our key ingredients, and then the last one is water, and so I've just got some water here, or you could use milk. Now the thing about using water is it's available in a tap and it's very easy, but milk will give a much softer dough, so if you want a really soft bread like a milk bread, then by all means use milk, that's absolutely fine. The equipment you will require to make your bread, you will require a bread scraper or spatula and a nice large bowl. Please choose a large bowl. Often when I'm teaching at the WI Cookery School, people pick the little bowls. We need space when we're mixing. So lots of room for our dough to rise and for us to mix and stir. So a nice big bowl, and then in my bowl, I've got my flour. So all I'm going to do now is start and show you how to make the dough. And making dough is just the most simple process ever. So we're going to add a little bit of fat into our mixture. Just gently rub it in. And don't think about when you're at school. It's not a cookery lesson like that. Just really loosely rub that fat into that flour. You could use olive oil, or you could use a vegetable oil, or as I said earlier, you could use no oil. So it just will give a better structure. So just gently rub that in. You can also make dough with your hands, and you can make this on a table as well. So if you want to make it straight on a table. Now we add our other ingredients. So we're using some yeast. So I'm using the easy action yeast. So pop in your yeast, and I'm then using some salt. Now, please don't put the salt directly on the yeast, because what will happen is if I put the salt on the top and then pour in my liquid, my salt will dissolve into my yeast and it will kill it. So because yeast is a living organism, salt actually can, if it's on top of it, will destroy it. So make sure the yeast's over the other side, and then we're going to mix those two together and add our liquid. So we've got yeast, we've got salt, our flour. Just gently combine them, and if you combine them well, it's not a problem. It's just that people have a habit of just putting everything on top. Now you're going to make a well in the middle, and because the proteins in the flour vary, you'll find there's no set amount of liquid, and this is the key to making bread. You need to actually trust your judgment, and cooking is about trust, it's about intuition. So add in your liquid, so add in some water into the center. And I'm using cold water. Now I know people hear about you stick your finger in if it's the right temperature, but cold has never killed yeast, heat does. So if you put it in a freezer, it will stop it growing, but it won't kill it. If we put it in a hot oven, it will kill it. So when you're doing your water, use cold. Our houses are warm these days, whereas they used to be really, really cold. So cold water and it will work, and it's a slower process. Put the spatula in the middle, or the bread scraper. And all I'm doing is stirring from the center. So don't pull the edges in, and you'll see it's falling down. Can you see the sides are dropping? Then add some more liquid, whoopsie, always into the well. And that way I can judge as it's picking up, because now the water is mixing with the proteins in the flour and it's starting to make gluten. If we get too much water, obviously it's not going to work, but if we get too little, we can't develop the gluten, and that's why often bread ends up really tough. So keep the scraper, I'm keeping the scraper in the middle, so it's staying in the center. Keep going round, and dough should be sticky. So if your dough is really, really tight, it won't work. It should never be hard to knead. Kneading is a really good exercise, and it should be an enjoyable one. So kneading dough shouldn't be hard. So now you'll see it starting to pick up, and as it picks up, you can see it's still quite tight. So dribble some more water around the edge, and just always keep the scraper in the middle. So I'm never taking it out, and as I'm going round, I'm then picking up. So I can see that's not going to pick up all that flour. You see that dough there? That's still some flour in the bowl. So pour a little bit more water in, and still with your scraper in the middle, go round. And that's now picked up all that flour beautifully. So what we're going to do now, I'm just going to move that out of the way. I'm going to tip out my dough. And we're going to knead it. So the dough should be sticky. It should stick to my fingers. If it doesn't stick to your finger, it's too dry. To be honest, if you've made it too tight, you need to throw it away and start again because it's not worth it and it's only a bit of flour. So we're then going to knead. Now kneading is the key part to develop the gluten and the stretch in the flour. So take your dough, if you put your hands at 12 o'clock, pull the dough to the middle and push down and turn. So to the middle, push down and turn, just to get it assembled. So all I'm doing is pulling the edges into the middle and then pulling it round. And it is sticky, it should be sticky. So please don't think it shouldn't be. It needs to have the tackiness. Now can you see that coming together now to make a dough? So I've now got it into a ball. And what I'm going to do now is if it's on your fingers, just rub your fingers, because if your hands are really, really covered in dough, you won't be able to knead it. So just take the bits off and don't be in a rush. Really just enjoy doing this. A little bit of flour onto our board, not too much. You can knead in olive oil if you want. So if you're making a pizza, you can use olive oil. Then with your hand, take your hand and with your heel, push away and turn. And go round in a clockwise manner. And all we're doing is lifting and pushing with the heel of our hand to knead our dough. Now if we're kneading by hand, and I suggest when you do this for the first time, you do make it by hand, because actually you'll feel what the dough feels like, and it's great for your arms, great exercise. So knead it round, and it needs to be done for 10 minutes. So 10 minutes of kneading. If you want to use a mixer with a dough hook after the first go, then just knead it for 4 minutes, because you can over knead it in a mixer. I doubt you'll over knead it with your hands, but you might. So time it for 10 minutes. And what's happening as I'm kneading this, it's going smoother. So it's getting smoother and smoother and smoother. So that's how you knead your dough. So that's then going to go into the bowl. It can go back in your original bowl. Please don't worry about cleaning it. And pop a damp tea towel over the top. And we're going to leave that to rise. Now we can leave that to rise just in our kitchen, because kitchens are really warm these days. The slower it rises, the better the flavour. So rising really quickly, actually you won't get such a good flavour. So you can also pop that in the fridge and leave it in the fridge overnight, and it will rise really slowly, and then you've got a dough for the next morning. So here we have a dough that has proved. So you can see how that's risen beautifully. We've got some nice little bubbles on the top, and that's our dough doubled in size. So a good guide for you is to say that it's a double the size it was when it started. So we're now going to knock this back. So we're going to take the dough out. We're going to knock out all that lovely air, and you'll possibly, sometimes you can hear it squeak. I don't know whether our sound is good enough to do that, but you can knock the bubbles out, and you can feel them with your fingers as you're doing this. You can really squidge them down, and it's the most tactile thing. It's lovely making dough, because you can really feel that air that's developed in it. The reason we knock back is because if we don't, we'll end up with a very light, airy loaf with lots of holes in it. So we knock it right back, and then we've got our beautiful dough, which then needs to rise again. So we can shape this into different things. So we can use this basic white dough now, and we are going to follow on from this video with a set of videos to show you how to use this dough to make a pizza, how to make cheese bread, how to make white rolls, and then we're going to also make some into some sweet bread, because sweet dough is delicious. So I hope you've enjoyed seeing how to make your basic white dough, and I hope you'll join us for the next video in how to make the next stage of bread. So good luck and thank you.